Hi, thanks for joining us. This is Miro Consulting's webinar on 8 ways you are overspending on Salesforce. We're going to begin the webinar in about 1 minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Again, this is Miro Consulting's webinar on 8 ways you are overspending on Salesforce. We're going to give everyone just another 30 seconds or so to log in. You know how it is with these things. You have to attend a meeting and all of a sudden your Zoom wants to update and your computer wants to update and you can't find your earphones, all those types of lovely issues we run into with this joining online meetings. All right, let's begin. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Donahue. I am the head of the Salesforce practice here at Miro Consulting. This is 8 ways you're overspending on Salesforce. And the question we'd like to ask is, are you paying for licenses or features that you're not really using? I am a Salesforce licensing expert, and I will be running you through the presentation today to sort of help you understand how to look at your Salesforce and evaluate it to determine, how much use you're getting out of it versus what you're not using and paying for, and if you're overpaying for it. Real quick, just so you know who we are, so you understand who's giving you this information. We're a leading global provider of software asset and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon Web Services, and Salesforce. We basically specialize in license management, advise on audits. Obviously, there's no audits with Salesforce, but we advise on audits with those other vendors. We talk about negotiation tactics, help you with your support management, and your cloud services. And basically, the way we provide value is we maximize your return on investment on your software license and subscriptions. We help you stay in compliance and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. And the greatest thing about working with Miro that you won't find about any of our competitors is we have a no risk performance guarantee. And that's basically that the amount of money we save you in savings will be more than our fees. And sometimes it's a lot more. Sometimes it's 100 times our fees. So there's no risk in working with us when it comes to reviewing your entitlements, your subscriptions, and everything else. So real quick, what we're going to talk about today is a couple types of ways you are getting less usage out of Salesforce or you are overpaying, and it's hard to see. So what we're going to talk about is active users who aren't active at all. We're going to talk about unassigned user licenses. We're going to talk about unused feature licenses, which sometimes could be tied together. Isn't that fun? Underactive users, users with too many licenses, the over licensed users. All those other fees that Salesforce charges you that are not user fees, like storages and shields and sandboxes and things like that. And adoption and rollout failures, which is, one of the something like 3 out of 5 CRM rollouts are a failure. A lot of those are Salesforce. And mistakes that a lot of organizations make at renewal. Because obviously you want to avoid all of that. So let's give you my basic example. And this is how, what I put it as, how an IT team and a procurement team, or a sales and marketing team, for example, how they can talk past each other. And it's because they define things differently. So something along these lines is the common miscommunication, where a Salesforce is your biggest cheerleader. Salesforce thinks you are going to have the biggest amount of growth you've ever had. You're going to have explosive growth. You're going to go viral. The sky's the limit. And because of that, you should buy a lot more Salesforce licenses now before you really need them. We've all been there. So during negotiations, as typical Salesforce negotiations, if they say you have about 1,000 licenses, they're going to say, hey, you know what you really need? You need about 1,500 licenses. So that's what you should renew for. Hey, we'll cut you a great deal on it, give you a free product to go with it. Sounds familiar. So procurement might ask IT, how many active users do we have? Well, active users means something very specific to IT. So IT might go look and say, hey, yeah, we have 950 active users. So procurement says, oh, well, okay, well, then maybe we're almost out of licenses. Maybe we should get 500 more. But in reality, of those licenses, of those 950 licenses, four of them are people, 400 of them are people who don't log in ever or rarely ever. So long ago that we don't even know when they last logged in. And that's the problem. What is an active user? And as far as Salesforce is concerned, an active user is someone who can log in and who can have things ownership assigned to them. It doesn't mean they ever have logged in. They could have actually never logged. So you can have an active user who's literally never logged into the system once, not one time. Or we've had some that they did log in once 10 years ago. We have seen these types of situations. So like I said, active is nothing more than a checkbox on the user's profile, letting them log in. And as I said, you can assign ownership to them. Now, if they become deactivated, they can still own things that they had owned previously. This would be something like an opportunity where you're not going to reassign some historic opportunity to a new sales rep because you want to know who the sales rep was that brought it in originally. So they can still own things if they're not active, but they can't have things assigned to them new that if they're not active. So that's all it means. It just means it's the box checked. They never logged in once. It's very possible. Or maybe they log in once a year. Or the other example I like to give is you might have a user who logs in every 3 months, like clockwork, because that's how often they have to change their password. So you may have users, besides not logging in, you may have users who've logged in, but they've never looked at a single record. They've never created anything. They've never edited anything. Like I said, they haven't logged in for years. I think our record now is we saw a system where the one user had not logged. It was one of the executives had not logged into the system in 10 years. Which was, quite frankly, beat the old record, I think, of about 6 years. So it can be a very, very long time. It can be people who don't even work for you anymore. There's plenty of times we've seen issues where people leave the organization and nobody turns off their Salesforce. Nobody goes in and deactivates them, and they're just sitting there. Or somebody goes in and they do what's called freezing them, which is typically you would do if somebody starts doing something crazy or an employee quits and you just need to stop them from accessing things. There's something called freeze, but they never deactivate the license. So it happens all the time. And like I said before, they may have never even logged into the system one time. Now, you might ask yourself, why would I have active users who aren't really active? Simple answer is you bought too many licenses. Salesforce Suite talked you into having a great discount if you bought a whole bunch of licenses, and you did, and you've assigned them all, and you're not really looking to see if they're being used because you don't need any more licenses right now. People tend to only look at usage when they need more licenses. And just so you know, an unused user license is one that you may have purchased, but it's not currently assigned to any user. And it's the most common way we find organizations are wasting money on Salesforce. Now, what would cause those licenses to not be assigned? By far and away, the most common is rollout and adoption failures. So this typically either takes the form of training your staff took a lot longer and was a lot harder than you expected it to be. So they're not using the system, and you don't have robust mechanisms in place to measure if they're using the system. Again, Salesforce makes this actually very difficult to measure. They do come with some adoption dashboards. If you've ever used them, you've probably noticed that they're not very useful. And in fact, Salesforce's adoption dashboards, they are very pro adoption. They're going to go out of their way to measure things in a way that make things look more used than they really are, or not show you how they're not used. And that typically is because the Salesforce rep will come along and say, hey, if you buy more licenses, we'll give you a bigger discount. And you know how some people at the organizations are, they love their big discount. The big discount they got is their big bragging point on how they justify their existence. And I'll run through an example of how that discount, how a bigger discount for more licenses can be a much worse deal if you're not using them. Sometimes it's not even anybody's fault. Sometimes it's just business conditions. You had to lay a bunch of people off. You're in the middle of a 5-year contract. Well, Salesforce doesn't care. You're still paying for those licenses. They're not going to take your business situation into account unless you go bankrupt. If you do go bankrupt, that is one way to pay a little less of your Salesforce bill. I don't recommend it. But there's otherwise, Salesforce is like, you bought it. That's it. And another one that is very interesting that has come up only recently since this feature has been available, and we've seen this one a lot, is that an organization will have, let's say we said before, has 1,000 licenses. They'll use all 1,000 licenses. Somebody's job becomes, okay, when you onboard somebody, go into Salesforce, go to the checkout. I'll explain what checkout is in a minute, and go buy a license for them. And we've seen situations where that was the process. Well, then a contract renewal happened and the organization bought, 500 more licenses. So, okay, great. You don't have to buy any more now at checkout. Well, nobody told that guy who sets people up in the system. So his process is still he goes and he buys a license for every new user. We've seen organizations with hundreds and hundreds of unused licenses because somebody on the team had a process they were given where they have to buy it. Just so you know what checkout is. Checkout is a way to buy additional licenses inside of Salesforce, almost like Salesforce was like a store, a shop. And if you have certain privileges, you can just buy those licenses. You don't need any approval. Like Salesforce isn't going to ask your legal department. Salesforce isn't going to ask your procurement department. Salesforce is just going to let you buy as many more licenses on that back end as you want. And it doesn't update your it's not like your contract gets updated. So a lot of organizations fall victim to this because it becomes a quick and easy way to get more licenses, but then the process runs amok and all of a sudden you have many, many more licenses. So let's just run through what I mean when I talk about the hidden cost of unused licenses. So company A on the right, company B on the left. Both organizations were looking at an initial license list price of $200. Now, there's no specific license I'm talking about here. That's $200. I'm just using that figure to make the math easier. All right, so one organization, company A, they get a 50% discount. Why? Because they purchased 1,000 licenses. And because they're getting a 50% discount, those licenses are only really costing them $100 a piece. Sounds great. Company B, on the other hand, plays it a little bit more conservatively. They only want to get 500 licenses because they're not quite sure how many they're really going to need, especially in this first renewal term. Well, because they only bought 500 licenses, they only get a 25% discount. So it would seem off the bat that company A did a little better. They got the higher discount. They're only paying a little bit more. You can see company A is only paying 100,000 versus company B 75,000. Now let's take a look at how many licenses are used. So what happens if they only end up using 500 licenses? So you can see company B bought the right amount, company A bought too many, but they got a bigger discount. You might say, well, it kind of, maybe it all equals out. Well, it really doesn't equal out because what you really got to look at is what is your real price per license after utilization. So once you factor in how many licenses they're actually using versus how many they are sitting on the shelf, you can see here with company A, they didn't get any discount at all because they didn't use the licenses. It, in effect, made it so they got a 0% discount. And company B over here ends up keeping their 25% discount because they're using them all. And that may seem like a little bit of basic math to you, but here's why I want to point it out. What happens once you add on all the extras? And that's when buying too many licenses that you're not using really, quite frankly, bites you in the ass because it's because of all the other things that are based on how many licenses you have. So both companies are smart. They buy support, they buy Shield. All of a sudden, look at that price difference now. All of a sudden, the price difference is almost 50% because of all those extras. So not only are unused licenses getting you in terms of the cost of the license, they're also costing you money in terms of the extra stuff that gets put on your bill that's based on how many licenses you have. Now, and this where I like to give this is if you were company A, if you're company B and you actually decided you really did need 1,000 licenses, you could purchase them additionally and it still wouldn't be as big. You'd still keep a lot of your discount here, whereas company A got completely wiped out. So that's what I want you to keep in mind. It's not just the license price. What it really comes with the discount, where it really comes down to is what is your actual price after utilization is taken into effect. So let's talk about a different type of user, the underactive user. So these aren't users who've never logged in at all. It's possible, but a lot of times they only log in infrequently, right? And that can very much mask the license not being used if the user basically logs in occasionally. That's one of the things we look for. So one of the best examples, like I said, was the user. So Salesforce has policies on how often you might have to change your password. And we've been in meetings where, I've had IT people say to me, oh, every one of our users logged, or 99% of our users logs in at least once a quarter. And it turns out that's because you forced them to do that to change their password. And in fact, once they do change their password, they don't do anything else. We might see users, like I said, who logged in years and years ago. 10 years is not the average, but we've seen instances where 25, 30% of the users haven't logged in 5 years. So it could be a lot. You wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, sometimes they just change their password. Occasionally we'll get people who only log in to look at a report. That's not necessarily wrong. If you've got executives who are, maybe not tech savvy, they don't need to use the system, they just need to look at some top line numbers. Hey, that could be normal. But if you've got a lot of users who are only logging in to look at one report, well, there's a lot easier ways to get them the data than to pay for a full Salesforce license. Underactive users tend to not contribute. They don't create any information. They don't edit information. They're not putting information into the system. And a lot of times that's where the value with this, something like Salesforce comes from, is putting information into the system. Another example I like to give is with salespeople in particular. We know how much our salespeople love Salesforce. So we have situations where the salesperson will run a deal all on their own, all off the books, do an email, do an Excel, and then only after the deal closes do they enter the deal in Salesforce. So they win every deal. Isn't that great? So that's another common example of underutilization. We also have the opposite. We have the over-licensed user who has licenses to do everything. And this typically comes in the form of organizations who will buy certain products, and they will buy a license for everyone in their organization, even if everyone in their organization doesn't need access to that product. There are plenty of different types of licenses that fit this. And what happens is it just kind of gets glossed over. Your sales rep will work with you and, okay, how many employees do you have? What products do you want? Okay. And they just hand you a quote that is every product you want for every employee in your organization. And if you don't stop and think about it and say, wait a minute, does this employee really need this? Do they need this other feature? Are they ever going to use this? You'd be surprised how often that is companies just blanket buy a license for everyone in the organization. Don't even think about if they need it. Some users don't. Some users don't even need a full license. There are lower levels than standard user licenses that are much less expensive, and they're great for people who only need to look at certain things. And the example I give is somebody in a call center, right? And they don't really need access to opportunities. Maybe they just need a little box that says whether the customer has anything going on or not. They really only need to look at the account and the contact information to send somebody an email. They don't need a full license if that's all they're doing. Same thing with custom apps. If you have users who are only using some custom apps you built in Salesforce and they don't really need the actual Salesforce stuff, they don't need a full license either. Developers all the time fit this criteria. They don't really need a full license. They just need a lower level license to access the app they work on. And a lot of it comes down to, and this is a real confusing one for people, sometimes certain licenses are both feature license and user licenses. And the way that organizations make mistakes is they assign the user a license, but they don't realize that they also have to go in and assign particular features to that user. Now, that user has the right because of the license they have, but if the organization doesn't assign the feature to the user, you're paying for that feature and your users aren't getting it. Very, very common scenario because Salesforce doesn't technically explain, oh, by the way, you need to license this user twice, once for their user license, once for their feature, or multiple features sometimes. So that is a very common way we see people buying things and then they don't realize they're not even using them. Real quick, just so you want to know what it is, a feature license is not a user license. So a feature license is something that you might get for free, you might pay for. It enables certain features for the user who has that assigned to them. So the user license lets you log in. The feature license lets you do something special on top of that. Now, it's very common. You might have a lot of feature licenses that are unassigned. So for example, marketing user, right? All of us have hundreds, thousands of marketing user feature licenses that aren't assigned because you get them for free. You get one for free for every license you have. So you don't need to assign them all. And that's one of the things that's important to know is if the feature license is free, don't worry if you have too many of them. Marketing users, one of them. Flow users, another. So flow users, somebody you probably only give your admins or your IT team. Your average salesperson has absolutely no need for a flow user license. And again, they come free. Don't worry about if it's free. Only worry about the feature licenses that you pay for. So it's perfectly normal to have. So what's not a feature license and not a user license? So there's a third category called add-on licenses. These are typically for additional products that you purchased. Perfect examples would be things like CPQ, service location, Einstein, lightning dialer. There's an 80-page booklet of them. I have a picture here. I have the address on screen. We'll send this to you after, so don't worry about having to write it down. But yeah, there's 80 pages of feature licenses. And these you should have assigned. You're paying for these. Almost, I think 99% of them are paid. So if you have add-on licenses that are not being assigned, you're spending money unnecessarily. So we were talking about using Salesforce efficiently and what stops organizations from using Salesforce efficiently. Well, a lot of it is lack of planning and expertise in the implementation. CRM implementations are very hard to get right. And the typical example I give is organizations will go out and buy Salesforce, which I refer to as like the Ferrari of CRMs. It's great, but it's expensive. And then they'll hire some guy off the street with no experience, put him in the driver's seat, and he crashes in the first turn, and they wonder what happened. And that's the common scenario. Organizations will spend a fortune on Salesforce and then not hire a qualified expert, and especially not hiring a qualified expert to determine what they actually should be purchasing from Salesforce to begin with. So they'll oftentimes start an implementation, it starts going wrong, teams start changing, IT implementation consultants get fired, and it becomes a big mess. And what happens is the organization loses interest in the product. If the product becomes known as the role becomes known as like a failure, people like to want to stay away from it. And what happens typically with organizations that don't plan it out with an expert is they overestimate their needs, and that's because Salesforce reps are experts at getting you to buy more than you need. Their job is to get you to buy as much as possible. That's how they get paid. That's how they get ranked. That's how they keep their job, by having you buy as much as possible. So that they're 100% incentivized. And in fact, your Salesforce partners who are integration partners are also incentivized to sell you as many licenses as they can possibly sell you, because Salesforce ranks its integration partners based on how many licenses under management. So in other words, all the licenses of all their clients. And then Salesforce gives them leads based on how many licenses they have under management. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest there when it comes to working with an implementation partner. Now, I want to go up, just state for the record, we are not a Salesforce. We're a Salesforce user. We love Salesforce. We're 100%, we recommend it to anybody, but we're not a Salesforce partner. And the reason for that is Salesforce has some language that basically says, we get to say the word fraudulent suspicions and you have to open your books to us. And we have our clients come first. We would never want to be in a situation where we want to tell Salesforce anything about our clients. So we're not a partner with them for that reason. We don't get anything from them. We're not incentivized to sell you as many licenses as possible. That's why we do this service where we help you use as little licenses as possible and get rid of the ones you don't need. And so this is what you want to avoid. You want to avoid when the stakeholders in the rollout sort of abandon hope and say, "Oh, this is going to fail. I want to get away from it." So you don't want to do that, and that's the biggest reason CRMs tend to fail. And on the backside, so that's on the front side when you're first starting. On the backside, there's a lot of mistakes people make in renewals. By far and away, the number one mistake is people wait too long. In general, what's going to happen is your Salesforce rep, they're planning on your renewal a year in advance. You should too. You really should start a year out, because some of these things can drag on. You'll find that you're trying to figure out how much you're using, how much you might want to spend. You might have pressures to reduce costs. You might have pressures to take on additional responsibilities. So, and it gets, time runs out, and Salesforce is good at not contact. If you're in a position they like and they see you're not using most of your stuff or a lot of your stuff, and they know your renewal's coming, they won't contact you. They're not going to call you up and say, "Hey, you're not even using half this stuff." They'll call you so late in your renewal cycle, you won't have any time to make any decisions. And in fact, check your Salesforce contract. It probably has a clause that says your contract technically renews at 60 days or 30 days before your actual renewal date. And if you don't tell them that you're not renewing 60 days out, you get renewed automatically for the same term. So if, that again, like we said, we've seen many organizations go past that deadline and they get a call from their Salesforce rep, and by then it's too late. So why are they paying too much? Well, in other reasons, they underestimate their uplift costs. If you just got a first term Salesforce contract, like this is your first renewal you've ever had, your cost might go up significantly. And that's because Salesforce has a philosophy called land and expand. So what they'll do is they'll give you a super cheap rate to sell you the initial deal, and then they may take half your discount away on renewal. Now, typically it's not quite that much, but it will be standard. It will go up a lot more than the standard uplift. Right now, the standard uplift this year is 9%. Everybody is getting that, just so you know. But it could be a lot more if you got some super sweetheart deal on your first, your first contract. A lot of times people overestimate their future growth. It's the reason they buy too much. Like I said, Salesforce is all about your future growth. A lot of times it's because they don't have anywhere else to go. Salesforce knows if you are really migrating. So Salesforce promises you we won't look at your data, and I 100% believe them. They don't look at your data, but they do look at your metadata. They do look at things like how much you're exporting. Are you doing certain things that are indicative of a company that's about to migrate to a new CRM and leave Salesforce? And we found a lot of organizations, when we talk to them, they say, oh, well, I'm just going to tell them they better give me a good deal, or I'm just going to walk and I'm going to go buy NetSuite or something else like that, or Microsoft CRM. And Salesforce says, okay, then leave, because they know you're not going anywhere. So that's one of the things I try to say is don't bluff Salesforce, because if you make no effort to migrate and then tell them you're migrating, they're going to know you're lying. They're going to know it's a bluff. They're not going to fall for it. That's why I say don't try to bluff them. They know. Sometimes renewal mistakes are missing terms and conditions. So one of the things we'll see is a company gets a great term and condition that's very important to them, that's outside of the typical master service agreement, and then they forget to include it on renewal, and Salesforce doesn't put it in because it's not like Salesforce is trying to take that clause away and get away with it. It just gets missed. You get the standard MSA and nobody notices that your custom conditions got missed. Like I said, if you haven't moved, you don't have leverage. Or if you are, if you've spent, thousands of hours customizing your Salesforce and it's extremely a lot of custom fields, a lot of custom processes, custom development, they know you're just not going to walk away with that. So they're going to know what kind of leverage you have versus what they have. And also, you might get pushed into an early renewal. One of the things Salesforce likes to do is call you up about 90 days before your renewal with a great sweetheart deal. And a lot of organizations will just say, oh, hey, that sounds good. Let's just do that. I could get this Salesforce renewal off my plate. Well, that's almost never going to be a great deal for you. That's why they're calling you up and offering it to you ahead of time. And by far and away, these all rise from the same root cause. Your organization doesn't have a software asset management policy. So if you don't have one of those, you're more likely to make some of these mistakes. And I'm running a little behind. Okay, real quick. So what are the key takeaways? Number one, start planning 12 months early. Have a software asset management policy. Understand your actual usage. This can be very difficult. That's why we recommend hiring experts to check it out. You want to know what you're paying for. Like I said, look in those. Do you have a whole bunch of feature licenses that you're not using and are assigned to no one? You should have a plan B. And let me give you a quick example of one I like to talk about here. So we have organizations, a couple of our recent organizations, I'll actually talk about one of my most recent organizations. They had a situation where they thought they were really on top of their licensing. And they had their IT team, when they met with us, said, you're not gonna find anything. We run a very tight ship here. And it turns out, because of turnover in the IT team, certain processes where they would evaluate things just stopped getting done. And because the company thought it was out of licenses, they just kept purchasing more over the course of their contract. Well, when we took a look at their systems, they had a $15 million 3-year contract. Turns out they were not using $5 million worth of those licenses. And that was just the user license. I'm not even talking about the cost of all the additional stuff that went with those users. And it completely slipped under the radar. Nobody noticed it at all because nobody was looking. And like I said, $5 million is a significant amount of money to overspend on Salesforce. Overspending like 30% is a hell of a lot of money. And that is the common scenario. Not everybody's paying millions of dollars, quite honestly. But even companies we've worked with companies who their bill's $100,000 a year. And even then we found ways to save them 20, 30%. And it's different with every organization. We find different things in different ways, getting rid of unused licenses, getting rid of feature stuff, but at the same time, changing the type of licenses people use, changing just the way the architecture works. So we found ways to make it so normally you might need to see opportunities, but we can push some of that information up to the account level. Now you don't need to see opportunities. Now you can buy a license that costs 1/10 as much. So little things like that. We have a lot of tricks for that. But that's what I want to stress is if you're in procurement, or you're an IT executive, if your team is saying we are running the tightest ship, there's nothing left to pick, there's no savings left behind, we hear that every time, and there's always savings. Sometimes there's amazingly significant savings. And your IT teams, their job is to do IT. Their job is not to be Salesforce licensing experts or renewal experts or contract experts. So it's kind of not their fault. So that's why we recommend bringing an expert in. It could be worth an incredible amount of money to you. So at that point, I will see if we have any questions. for the room here. And again, if you want to talk about it in more in depth, you can contact us at Miro Consulting. We are Miro Consulting on the web. We are info@miroconsulting.com, or you can reach out and talk to us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208. And I will just pull up my question box to see if we have any. We had one come in ahead of time, which was essentially the question was, if I'm a marketing and sales leader and I don't really, how do I know my IT team is giving me the correct information? And our answer is usually something like, they probably are giving you the correct information, but that doesn't mean that what it means to them is the same as what it means to you. And I give that example about being active or not. So again, I see no other questions have come in. In the meantime, that concludes our webinar. Again, if you want to save some money on your Salesforce payments and your renewals, give us a call. We might be able to save you millions and millions of dollars. Thank you very much. This concludes the webinar. I want everybody to have a great day.